Okay, everyone, welcome to one of the most exciting webinars that we have prepared for the end of the year with Office R&D. My name is Ivan. I'm the Chief Product Officer at Office R&D. I have been with the company for 8 years, and thus I have enjoyed the flex industry for 8 years, kind of looking at how it grew, all the troubles that it went through, and what is kind of ahead is the big question that we're going to be trying to answer today with this beautiful group of human beings from all across the world. I'm currently located in Bulgaria. You're going to hear more about our participants. So without further ado, I'm going to let our speakers today present themselves. So whoever wants to go first, please do.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much, Ivan and the entire Office R&D team for having us today. My name is Pauline Roussel. I'm originally French, in case the accent wasn't obvious, but I've been living in Berlin for the last 11 years. I started in coworking about 10 years ago. I was the chief happiness officer of a coworking space, then moved on to co-found Coworkies, which is a job board. And we also run a consultancy company called 250, where we help co-working operators improve their operational and community strategies. That's about me. Thanks for having me.
Welcome on board, Pauline.
Hi, my name is Ashley Proctor. I am the founder of Creative Blueprint and the executive director of Coworking Canada, which is an alliance of coworking operators from across Canada. We also produce an annual unconference. We just hosted our 11th annual. I opened my first space in 2004, so I've been in the industry for about 22 years now, built 9 locations across North America. And my focus is really on co-working as essential community infrastructure as part of a social purpose real estate strategy. And I create creative and cultural hubs and co-working designed to support resilient communities and workers.
Thank you, Ashley. Okay, gentlemen, who's next?
Hi guys, I'm James Panapinto. I am the general manager of Clockwise in Manchester. I also sit as the UK chair for the Future Leaders of Co-working. For those who haven't come across Flock, we are a peer-led leadership accelerator. We focus on career and professional development for the next generation of leaders within Flex and co-working. We're currently in the UK and the US. And we really enjoy speaking to those up and coming and those future leaders of our space.
Hey guys, I'm David Walker. I run coworkingconsulting.com. Like Ashley, I've been in the industry for a while, about 17 years, so not quite as long as Ashley. But 2008, I started a co-working space with some co-founders in Austin, ran that for a few years, or 6 years, opened up a few locations, and then kind of became a consultant over time. And so I've been consulting for a little over a decade now. Across the globe, mainly working with real estate developers who are looking to kind of develop business models that kind of mesh with the co-working and flex world. But I've also worked with a lot of operators all over the place, and just really excited to be on this panel. Thank you, Yvonne and Office R&D, for hosting us today and holding space for this dialogue. Co-working is at an interesting time, and so it's exciting to get together. Thank you.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much for the intros. Apparently, we have almost every region represented on this call, which I think is going to be the most interesting part. So we can hear how are the different regions doing and what is the point of view around the trends in co-working for next year. I know that all of you want to kind of kick off the conversation, but just a small housekeeping item. First of all, we are recording this webinar. So for those of you that are busy right now, we're going to share it after that. So you can probably kind of listen to it on 2x speed and get through the whole content as quickly as possible. If you have any kind of questions, we are going to reserve some time at the end to make sure that you can ask them. And also, after the webinar, you're going to receive a PDF with all the necessary information around the Flex trends. So yeah, stay tuned. And for those of you that are here, we're now going to kick it off with our first question. So as we discussed, 2025 is almost ending. It has been a very eventful year for co-working as well. So I wanted to just ask you guys to share your perspective on what are kind of the early signals you think that will define the main trends in co-working and flex spaces in 2026, or maybe also give a little bit of an idea of what are the highlights for you this year for the industry from your perspective. Okay.
I could start off. I think everyone is realizing that co-working has become mainstream. All businesses of all sizes are looking at flexible options, and no one wants to commit to your traditional leases anymore. They're looking at co-working as this kind of plug and play option. You've got entrepreneurs and independents that have always utilized co-working spaces, and now as flex, becomes a space usage model, and then co-working with hospitality, I think we're just going to kind of continue to see it. One particular thing that I wanted to point out from a real estate side is that there is what I call kind of the pandemic lease cliff that has started to happen. So right around COVID 2020, a lot of tenants had to renegotiate their leases with their landlords. And because all of their workers were staying from home, and so they didn't want to pay the full rent anymore. And so what you've started to see is that right now at the 5-year mark, which is right around the average commercial lease, all the tenants are considering leaving. And so as they're considering leaving, they're looking at flexible options because they don't want to get stuck in the same static leases of yesteryear. And so now you're seeing building owners think, how do we keep these tenants? And then you're seeing operators saying, how do we get these members? And so I think that we're just going to continue to see this get more and more mainstream as the main workforce is shifting completely over to a flexible mindset.
I don't know what. Oh, go for it, Ashley. Sorry.
Thank you, Polly. I think that what I'm seeing more of, and not necessarily in Canada, but more generally, is sort of a reminder of where the movement began. And I like to think, I think I like to bring this up maybe more than I should, but to remind folks that co-working started as a grassroots movement that was rooted in community and mutual aid and mutual support. Everything started by the members for the members. And I think that we're starting to see a bit of a return to that in a really meaningful way. I also think that with the rise of AI in a lot, we'll talk about this later, I'm sure, as well, but with the rise of AI, I think people are starting to crave and really gravitate toward things that are human again, like that realness of human interactions and closeness and those community ties and connection that we have within co-working communities. And I think that that's great news for independent co-working operators and folks who are really focused on cultivating that strong sense of community and connection in their spaces.
From my side, I like this question because I always like to look at the macro level of things, how the overall influence of the world had some implications on co-working. And I just attended a few conferences also over the last 3 weeks where, it kind of confirmed everything we were seeing, at least again in Europe. So I don't want to make generalization for other regions of the world. But I think there were two major forces this year in Europe that impacted co-working spaces in a way because it impacted businesses overall. So the first one is inflation. Although it's kind of stabilizing and lowering a little, we can see and in preparation for this event, I was trying to look at numbers. In Eurostat, we see that the inflation is around 2% in Europe, but it definitely had some implications for operators in terms of cost margins. So I think this year was a little bit stressful in that regard. And the second thing that we also saw was in terms of the global economy, it was a little bit slower this year. So again, for Europe, I was checking on Eurostat for numbers, and you could see that, for instance, countries like France, Italy, Germany, they had a much slower economic growth, which in turns was an opportunity kind of for co-working spaces because businesses didn't want to lease take very long leases. So co-working came as a solution of okay, right now the economy is not looking great. I'm not going to commit for very long leases. So maybe co-working is a good opportunity. But I think those were like big forces in 2025 that are, in my view, also going to influence what's coming our way in 2026.
And I've seen across the UK, something that's been very new since I joined sort of Flex and co-working is in the UK markets, it's no longer London centric. It's no longer London first, and every other city and every other location then gets the same products and amenities 3 years later. All across the market now, there's some really good and really big regional operators that not only have their big stake in their own individual markets, but are going everywhere that is in London. Clockwise didn't start in London; we started up in Scotland. You got places like Patch or projects in Bristol who are doing amazing things and competing with the standards sort of set within the city. I've also saw across the UK market as well, it's no longer who can offer the cheapest space or the best deal or the best fixed rate or the best fixed value. It's this is our product, these are our values, here's what we're selling. We want you to be part of our community. If price is your driver, we may not be for you. And I think it's really exciting. That's how the market's evolving towards.
I think one thing that I wanted to add too, just as kind of we're enriching this discussion about the evolution and growth of the industry. When Ashley mentions that we're coming back to kind of the original ethos and how that's rising up again, I think that's really key. And I think that this is where the huge opportunity is too, as an industry, because as the mainstream, I'm speaking about, the tenants, and then you hear co-working operators like, well, no, they're members. And so it's like there is kind of this, as this evolution is happening, where the mainstream tenant population is coming into the member population of co-working spaces. It's kind of incumbent upon the operators to think, well, how do we strategically welcome everyone into this hospitality, authenticity model, this community model? And I think that historically, the industry has seen like, oh, you've got corporate members, and then you've got the real members. And I think that in a way, there is going to be kind of this coming together, but it's up to the operator to figure out, well, how do you unify this community in a meaningful way so that everyone's not just kind of siloed off? And so I'm really curious to see how that's going to sort out. And, time will tell, but at the end of the day, you're going to have a multifaceted membership base in these spaces, but how people relate to each other is really up to the operator.
David, I think that.
Oh, sorry. We keep on wanting. Go for it.
I think that's really key, David. And I think I saw this in the early days as well when we started bringing artists into a co-working space and putting them in the same building, where the artists became more entrepreneurial and the entrepreneurs became more creative. We're seeing this with the corporate members or folks who haven't traditionally used co-working spaces starting to mix and mingle with the independents, the small businesses, the gig workers, and some really magical solutions are starting to come out of that. But I agree with you that it really is up to the operator to do that in a good way. That doesn't really allow either culture to dominate the space or any one of the corporate cultures to dominate the space, but really bring people to this central way of being and doing that is in community.
And just to add on what you guys were saying, for me, what's also interesting is that this year co-working actually turned 20 years. It started in 2005. Now we're 2025. It's 20 years of co-working. And when you compare it to other industries, and because we talk about hospitality, you can compare it to hotels. It's also crazy to see how fast things have been growing and evolving to the level where we are now, about what James and David and Ashley were talking in terms of service, hospitality, ways of doing things and impact. In just 20 years, there's so much that has been happening and it has grown exponentially. So it's also a very good sign, I think, for the industry overall.
But people get it as well. There's less education. People come to a co-working space or a flex space and understand what the concept is, and understand, despite being in a traditional lease space for the last 10 years, by sitting on a table next to a creative or an accountant or a marketer, they can benefit by making those connections and being joining that community. You no longer just come into a space now just to plug in and get Wi-Fi. It's you coming in to make those connections and work on your business as well as yourself.
And James, I wanted to ask you about recent developments in the UK, where I know you guys are not extremely happy with the new budget that is being kind of accepted and all that. Is this going to have an impact, you think, next year for the co-working industry in the UK?
So, firstly, I think it was the apprehension of the budget that had the knock-on effect rather than the actual budget. It was people holding the breath, waiting to see what this looks like, rather than the budget itself.
Mm.
Now the budget has been released. I think people can start thinking more strategically and look at their growth plans, moving away from sort of again the fixed office or long-term leases. I think flex and co-working is going to be a better option because you can flex up, you can grow, you can do your rolling monthly contracts, and then let's just see where you manage costs as and when. I think by joining a flex space with a lot of data points is going to be very beneficial to a lot of people. Am I getting the right utilization? Am I going to be in the right, again, go back, do I need to be in the centre of London, or can I get a more suburban space and still do what I need to do? So will it have an effect? Yes. Will it be inherently negative? I'm not too sure yet, but I think we'll be ready for it as and when.
Okay. And I guess the last one that I'm hearing more and more about, maybe primarily in London, but I don't know about the other parts of the world. Where do you see the role of the landlords next year? Because I learned a new word, and I think it was shared in some of the other webinars. The word like brand lord, basically
Mhm.
landlords starting to do their own brands, and they want to do flex working for different reasons. Some of them just because, okay, we need to have this in our portfolio of buildings, others because they want to activate buildings that are probably not doing very well, and the third group that actually believes that this is kind of fully the future. Where do you stand on that? Do you think it's an actual trend, or it's just like a few landlords here and there are doing it and it's basically the same throughout the years?
I could jump into that a little bit. I work with a lot of asset owners, landlords who are looking to initially plug a gap of vacancy. And they're like, we're losing money. No one's leasing my space anymore. What do I do? Oh, look at co-working over here. They're selling out like crazy. How do we become more like them? Maybe we just need a third party operator to become a tenant in our building. Sometimes that solves the issue, but I think what you're mentioning, Yvonne, about the brand lord is that they're realizing that, well, maybe we can create flexible models. Maybe we can create operational models. Although at the same time, it's really tricky for building owners to think in terms of co-working operations. There are a lot of moving pieces. And so a lot of times a building owner would rather have a third party operator kind of come into the space. But at the same time, a lot of building owners are thinking in terms of, well, how do we create a building that is a compelling destination spot? And so then they realize, well, maybe we need a brand. And so then they might partner with a management partner, or they might create their own. But I think at the end of the day, what you're seeing is a flexible mindset across the board, from the building owners down to the individual users. We all just have to disrupt our mindset because the world is changing fast, and we just got to be open to new ways of doing it. And building owners, they're coming along. It's very experimental. And there's a lot of like thinking and multi-stakeholder conversations that need to happen. But I definitely think it's a wave of the future, especially if there's partnerships between existing operators and future brand lords.
For me, the brand lords, it's interesting because I was talking about it in France last week at the conference of the French spaces. And they were like, yeah, but it exists in France since so long. It's nothing new, you know? And I think it really depends on the maturity of the market as well, and the maturity of the real estate portfolio, commercial real estate portfolio in certain cities or certain countries. So, for instance, in cities like Paris, where, there's a lot of real estate. People were not so surprised by the concept of brand lords. I even learned, for instance, that in France now, a lot of corporate companies who own their assets, so they own their buildings, like for instance, the National French Channel, they have a huge tower which is underused, and now they are creating their own co-working space for brand, which does not necessarily mean they will open up for the outside world, but they just want to bring in more like the other companies with whom they collaborate and everything. So I think it's really connected to the maturity of the market, in my view, the brand lord. And some other markets where co-working is more new, maybe this is not yet a thing, but it might come in like 3-4 years. So it really depends, I would say.
Interesting. I didn't know that France was so ahead of the game on this one. Yeah.
I also didn't know. I just learned it last week. I was also very surprised. I thought I was bringing something new and nobody was very impressed. Like,
Everybody's
yeah,
like,
well, okay.
you're late to the party.
They're like, okay, yeah, refresh your memory. I was like, okay, sorry, guys.
Yeah. Okay. Well, let's move to the next one. Thank you very much for sharing your observations and your bets for next year. I guess the new one, the next one is focused on the big shifts that you think are going to happen in terms of how members actually use flexible workspace, how they value it, probably, and what is actually going to be important next year. I think you touched upon this here and there, but it's going to be interesting to get into more details.
I can start with just from a space access shift, that's happening, kind of tied to companies looking at co-working spaces or shared workspaces as a solution for their workplace strategy needs. Where can their workforce land? One thing that is really tricky for operators that is evolving already and needs to evolve is this expectation that everyone fits into a one-size-fits-all membership. And historically, when co-working first got started, in order to keep things simple, it's like, we got one membership. This is what it is. This is how much it costs. This is what it includes. Oh, you don't fit our membership? Well, try to fit our membership. But now, as like the mainstream tidal wave of demand is coming, it's incumbent upon operators to be able to meet people where they are. Like if a company comes to an operator and says, hey, we need a space for 50 people, the first inflexible mindset of an operator would be, we don't have space for 50 people. I'm sorry. But if you can instead say, well, we've got 2 medium offices and we can give you those. And we can also include 10 co-working memberships and X number of meeting room credits. We can say, yes, we'll load up all of your people into our space access, app, space access place. We'll put you into our co-working system, and then we can figure out a way so that your members or your employees can utilize our space. And so I think that you're going to have to see a lot of almost infinite accessibility from operators to be able to say yes and then figure out the details. Because at the end of the day, these custom packages are going to be necessary. And this wasn't always possible because technology wasn't as innovative as it is now. When we started our space in 2008, we were taking payment via PayPal and managing it, in Google Sheets. But now you've got fancy systems, access systems and invoicing systems and credit systems and pricing systems. And so it's like, how do you figure out a way to utilize all that so that you can say yes to more?
I think also to add, oh,
Go
really?
ahead,
That's funny. 2 weeks ago, when I was in Berlin, I moderated a panel that made me reflect on that question about fractional offices. So, this notion that like basically you have one office and then few companies share it throughout the week. So company A would be there Monday, Tuesday, company B for like Wednesday to Friday. And then that's how it works. And for me, that said also a lot, and that echoes, I think, what James was saying earlier about the understanding of co-working, how much it has grown, and like companies now really, use it in a way that's also seamlessly integrating into what they need and into their kind of like workplace strategy. Okay, we want people to be 2 days in a week in the office. Let's use a co-working space because then we got all the benefits around it. So I think for me that was very interesting. And then there was another thing that I found very interesting at Co-working Europe that was talked about when they talked about the occupier. So yes, the members was also something about, under the understanding of co-working, and basically because the industry is professionalizing so much, the expectations of members are also rising, because basically now we are giving them access to so many things, podcast studio, gym, showers and whatnot, that basically the expectations of everybody is also rising. So if people visit few co-working spaces and one of them doesn't have the same amenities, then people are kind of like comparing in that way. So I thought those were like two very interesting kind of line of thoughts around the question that we are currently discussing.
Yeah, and I think that the way that folks are using co-working individually is different. The way that corporations are viewing co-working as a tool in their toolbox is not necessarily their only strategy in some cases, but I saw this through my time supporting DeskPass, where organizations would look for a way to provide a budget for their team members to spend in any way they want on an aggregator or a platform or at a certain space. And these folks weren't choosing one full-time membership at one space. They were using multiple spaces. I happen to be a member at multiple spaces now that I don't run my own space anymore. Um, and you go to different spaces for different reasons. I go one place when I want to really focus and be quiet. I go to another place where I want to be more social. There's another one that hosts really incredible educational events that I participate in. And I think that that's what we're seeing as well with these organizations know that maybe we go closer to where the manager is for a meeting once a week, but then as a group, we have a working day somewhere else. And so we're definitely seeing the employers paying for the employees to have access to space, but the employees are still the ones choosing when and where they might work.
I think as well that space is now needs to be deliberate. Why do you need the space? Do we need to go for co-working connection? Do I've got a meeting? Do I need to be here? Do I need to be there? But I've also found the method of providers doing we'll just build it and people show up just doesn't work anymore. We need to go those 2, 3, 4 steps more because we are competing with not only space operators but people working from home, people working at home 4, 5 days a week, and also coffee shops. I also think you need to adapt to whatever market you're in. And again, let's just copy and paste and roll out 100 locations. It just doesn't work. I always go back to the example of any hospitality business opening up in Manchester that comes from London, just comes in, puts a B on the wall, and says, Joy Division, and we're now a Manchester restaurant. And inherently, they just don't work. You have to adapt to your local market, you have to adapt to your communities, and you have to adapt to whomever is your customer base may be.
And I think to add on what you're saying, James, the beautiful things about co-working is that we are not afraid to go where our clients are or members are. So for instance, in the UK and even in France and in other regions, even in Germany, now I sit in Berlin, brands are not afraid to be in residential areas, which, before COVID would have sounded crazy to go in like places where people live. But now in the UK, you see that you have brands who are specifically targeting being close to the home of people. And I think that's also really nice because it means that there is this relationship between the co-working brand and the members to be like, hey guys, we see you, we understand that you don't want to commute so long. So let's be closer to you kind of and give you options to access a professional workspace closer from home, which I think is also very beautiful in that regard.
I think one thing I wanted to add too, just as, we're thinking about, so when Pauline, you mentioned about like people are comparing like this co-working space has this and, this one doesn't have this. And there's also like the business financial model consideration of it as well. And so this is one thing that I always remind new operators or people who are developing new businesses too, is that yes, you can have the fancy amenity here, which looks really good on a brochure. But at the same time, you always have to balance it with the monetization strategy. And so that's always the key in a co-working business is like, what are the value add free amenities? And then where is your business model grounded in? And so if your business model is working really well with a lot of private offices and a very hybrid membership model, then yes, allocate some extra space to, this really cool idea. But that's always the trick when you're allocating a co-working business is like, do I put a boring private office here, which is going to generate lots of consistent revenue? Or do I put like this really cool amenity that everyone seems to be wanting? And so that's always up to the operators to always kind of have that decision in mind.
Yeah, it's interesting that you mentioned the extra amenities and the fact that people are kind of starting to look for them. I remember one conversation we had at the GWA that a thing that apparently in the US is becoming a little bit more popular is like not exactly a country club because not like elitist kind of club that you go there, but like closer to residential areas and cul-de-sacs, kind of these clubs where you have access to a gym, to some sort of small restaurant, and you have a like a playground for the kids or somewhere where you can leave them, and you also have kind of a co-working space in there. And I immediately remembered about Lifetime Work because they kind of tried to combine the gym with a co-working space and this kind of concept. So I'm just wondering, are you seeing this actually happening in the US, or this was just a few examples? Is it happening across the world where you now have like a playground for the kids and a restaurant there as well? Where it's like, what do you think about this trend?
I'm seeing this everywhere. I'm really thrilled about this actually, because this
Yeah.
was the model that we started out with 20 years ago. Co-working as one of the essential pieces in this larger community hub, which is meant to be community infrastructure. And I can touch on that a bit more later as well. But um, I think it's actually sort of the future of the industry is for co-working to play a really essential piece in a larger puzzle. And we're definitely seeing that more often, whether it be part of a residential offering in a condo building with co-working, childcare, gym involved in that kind of a space, or whether it's part of a larger community center or hub that also focuses on business development or workforce development, community programming, community services, education, all kinds of things happening in one place. All of the spaces that I've built and the ones I continue to consult or advise on, there has to be at least 10 reasons to go to this space. Just to work at a desk has never been enough and definitely is not enough in this day and age.
One
I
thing I
think
just want to add to that, because I completely agree, Ashley, that you know these parts are very important, and I think that one thing that I've noticed with a lot of co-working operators and people who have started co-working spaces is the intention behind starting a space is often in the beginning human first, and sometimes money second. And this is actually where the struggle is for a lot of independent operators. And I definitely think that because of the ethos of the average kind of DNA of a co-working operator, there is this goal to want to be able to expand the value of the work experience. And so I think that it's easy, and I'm sometimes the worst culprit of it, to get overly focused on the monetization, that you forget the power as the operator, as the facilitator of the space, that you have the power to create a holistic work environment for people where you can introduce all these sorts of things. And so I think I'm actually really excited about the future of the working world, because you give the reins to a co-working operator and they'll start thinking about all these like great things that aren't just here's space. It's more like it's not what I do at a space, but what can a space do for me? And I think that that's a shift that the co-working industry kind of gifts the working model of the future.
for me, what's also interesting, when we published our first book, Around the World in 250 Co-working Spaces, we came up with this quote that says, co-working is the same dish, everyone cooks differently. And when before you could have seen, the notion of like co-working being that dish where it was a space that was started, now we kind of like see also the reverse engineering version of this. Like for instance, in Paris, there is a bouldering, and I know in the US it exists for a while, but in Paris, there's a bouldering brand who developed co-working inside because they were like, okay, people want to work before or after the session, so let's make a proper co-working, not something that's like in the middle of everything. But then you also have hotel brands that developed amazing co-working brands. I'm thinking, for instance, about the Hoxton who made Working From. So you can see, and even like Accor, who in France who acquired Wojo, and then you have co-working being implemented everywhere. So you can see that it went from something that was a physical location to also becoming a service that's being implemented in a lot of different other type of places. So I'm like, maybe soon you'll have a co-working space in a hospital, or you'll have a co-working space, I don't know, like in other places where people actually also need to keep up with work. And then, as you were saying, David, it just follows you wherever you need to work, kind of. And by the way, I just want to add one more thing that was very cool. In 2017, so that was kind of like early on, we went to a conference in Poland, and there was a whole wagon back in the days that was a co-working space, but it was proper co-working with like proper Wi-Fi. They had a phone booth inside, so it was already kind of like early in the thinking. But I thought that was also cool to see that train companies are even thinking how to make proper like offices within trains because people need to work as well when they commute.
Okay, that actually brings us very well into the next question, which is more around technologies and business models that you believe are gaining momentum and could actually have a strong impact on next year. So apparently, something that I heard over here is that co-working is almost becoming like switching from, yeah, this is a physical space where we're going to make co-working to more like a co-working as a service, which is getting implemented in all kinds of industries. So is this a thing actually? Are there other business models you're seeing or technologies that you think are going to have a strong impact on co-working next year? What people should consider?
I mean, the elephant in the room is AI. We cannot not.
I waited for that. I waited.
I mean, come on, we cannot not address it, I guess. David, was it what you were gonna say, or?
Yeah, well, it was about AI actually. And so it's like AI is such an interesting thing. So happy birthday to ChatGPT. It just turned 3 years old a couple of
Oh,
days ago.
wow.
It is a baby. And I don't think that we've seen the beginning of what AI is going to do, one, to our industry, but two, to our society. And I think that we've got to learn how to utilize it. And I would think that in terms of technology, certainly you've got different AI tools out there that can do this or do that, do dynamic pricing and do lead generation follow up. But I think that the biggest use of AI for operators and people building their future spaces is to get all your data about your business. You can export the reports from any platform or whatever it is, and your brand ethos, your vision for the business, and get it into some centralized AI tool, whether that's ChatGPT or Gemini or Claude or a custom one that you could build on your own. Because once you get the data into it and you create your own, central brain, then you can utilize AI to help you make strategic decisions. Maybe if AI knows everything about your business, and then you have corporation XYZ over that says, I have 300 employees. How can we utilize your 2,000 square foot co-working space? Well, you just ask your central brain and it helps you figure out something. So I think getting the data into a tool and utilizing it is going to really help evolve and disrupt and introduce new ways to think about our own businesses. So that's one thing I would suggest for sure.
For me, what's exciting about technology, especially with AI, although I feel we are still scratching the surface, because at Coworking Europe, I remember Carsten from Deskmag was presenting a slide about how coworking operators are currently using AI, and it was still at the very early stage of like, okay, for doing content, for emails and everything, but it was not like yet to the full potential of what AI can offer. But what I find very exciting, and maybe Office R&D is full on going that way, Ivan, you should tell us. But it's also to see, that basically thanks to AI, we're gonna be able to automate so much more of the operations, which means that the teams will be able to first, as David was saying about sales lead generation, and we'll be able to know our customers and members much better, and then we'll be able also to spend more time human to human instead of having to constantly, chase technology or chase like invoices and whatnot, because all of that will be pretty much automated. I don't know if that will happen next year, but I'm really curious to see if we are going to start to, see some of that happening thanks to you guys, what you're doing at Office R&D or other co-working software providers. But I think technology will really also support more human-to-human interactions because it will be able to do all the rest.
I also think AI could also go the opposite directions. To have a space that's fully automated, to have, you go to hotels now and you've got your self-check-in desk, which generates a key card on your phone while stopping workspaces from going the same way. You need a meeting space, you need a co-work space, you need a phone booth. Why can't I have an app on my phone? AI tell me where I need to go. Not a problem, it's all sorted for you. Go right in, go right ahead. Makes it slightly easier, make it slightly more convenient for people.
Well, that's the dichotomy at play, right? It's like does AI make us less human or more human? You know, and so it's like, to Pauline's point, if you can get AI to sort through the rigmarole, then it gives you the opportunity as the operator to be more human, so that you're not so overwhelmed by the trials and tribulations of following up with people or handling a meeting room booking, etc. But it does create automations, like where the future might be a fully automated co-working space. And to what end? Does then co-working become this fully commoditized offering that takes away the humanness of the experience? Well, at the end of the day, the operator is holding the reins, and so you can kind of do what you got to do, but we can't resist it. But at the same time, we have to put our own spin on it. And I think that this is really like, it's what everyone's thinking about, And I think one of the coolest things out of AI and the technologies has been the dynamic pricing that's been happening in the industry. A meeting room that sits empty at an odd hour of the day, priced at full price, versus a meeting room that sits empty, priced at a high discount based upon dynamic pricing, is going to be able to get people in. And so there's these tricks that the industry is utilizing, but at the end of the day, it's like, what I would love is if we could see the industry utilize AI for an intense hospitality strategy. You go into like a hotel, and there's this feeling of hospitality. So historically, co-working spaces had hospitality because they had an amazing community manager. But then you talk to that community manager, and they're like the best friend of every single person in the whole building, which is kind of overwhelming to take on the energy and the relationships of everyone. But like, how do you scale that? What if instead you had that community manager who is the leader of this AI intelligent CRM hospitality platform? Well, then you could do some amazing things with that. So I think we're just seeing the beginning for sure.
I think for me, it's important to stick to business models versus the technologies. When I first started, there was no co-working technology, as David mentioned. There were no co-working conferences or alliances or any kind of supportive tech design to run these spaces. So we had to be creative. And I think maybe that's also what helped some of us in creating these new business models. And we're really starting to see them come into fruition now, which is exciting. So most of the models that I work with and what I'm seeing more and more of these days is around social purpose real estate. And if we truly believe that our co-working communities are essential community infrastructure, we need to protect them long term as assets that the community owns and holds. And so I'm starting to see a lot of organizations, especially ones that are independently operated or community driven, to think about real estate or long-term real estate investment in a different way. And so partnering with community land trust to hold community property or co-working spaces, cultural spaces, long-term in perpetuity for the community. That means that all of the models that exist within that building are at market or below market, and that sustains a model like a community-owned co-working space for a very long time. We're also seeing those models being used to prevent gentrification and maintain like community identity and cohesion in some really rapidly changing neighborhoods, particularly where I live in Toronto and Kensington Market. We're seeing this as well. And I think that the models that are exciting are the ones that are really co-working operators actually co-working, collaborating, using these new collaborative models and strategic partnerships, whether it be with the asset owners or becoming the asset owners themselves. That's really exciting to me. And so a multi-use hub or these creative and cultural venues alongside co-working space, but in a way that means that the forces that traditionally impact independent operators or sort of small single operator spaces, those market impacts aren't felt in a sustainable model. And so there's a way to protect this social infrastructure for a very long time. And I think that more cities and organizations that are also doing this kind of work, whether it be to support economic development or entrepreneurship or different unions and co-ops and nonprofits providing community service, they all have similar struggles. And so when we start collaborating and co-working the verb, we start to see these new models emerge in a really exciting way, and they're going to be around for a long time. A lot of the deals that are being made now through community land trusts literally ensure that those properties remain in community control for 99 years or more. So that means those spaces aren't going anywhere.
I think to riff on the Ashley's point about the business models and collaborating, one thing I know I just kind of went on a tangent with my hospitality AI future, but like when we get down to the business models, I think one thing that we are going to see, and Yvonne uh, nuanced it earlier about the asset owner, is that I definitely think that there's going to be an asset-wide strategy and a business model that's going to happen because the operators, whether or not they realize it or not, if they're like on one floor of a multi-floor building, they are the heartbeat of that building. And the members know it. The asset owner may not know it, but every tenant in that building knows that the cool stuff is happening on floor number 9, or whatever it is. And so I think that we are going to start to see that as asset owners have a vacant 14th floor and a vacant 12th floor. Like, but what is it with that 9th floor? They're always full all the time. How can we collaborate with them to help us create a cohesive business model and a tractor for the rest of the spaces? So I definitely think that you're going to see business models that are very tenant friendly, that the tenant on XYZ floor has some sort of access to the co-working space in a very thoughtful way that is driven by collaboration directly with the asset owner, where the landlord makes it a part of the lease, where, hey, if you sign this lease on this full floor, you also get this value from the co-working space. And then the co-working space has to create a custom. This is about being accessible as an operator. How do you create a custom package for all tenants? So yeah, sure, they could join as a member and book a conference room in your space. But if it's not included with their lease, they're not going to do it. Where they're going to think that their boss is going to think they're crazy for wanting to leave their office to go down to the co-working space. But if you make it this fluid experience for all tenants and the asset owner to be able to make the space more kind of dynamic, it's going to attract tenants at a premium, and they're going to see the co-working space as not only the heartbeat of the building, but also the monetization secret, because then it gets everyone flowing in and out. But it is tricky as an operator. It's like, well, how do we figure that out? Well, you got to evolve your business model to be able to say yes.
And to add on what's being said from me, I also observed that the different conferences I attended, what were the panels around business models that were really popular? Where were the questions going? And I think everything in terms of like business models for co-working spaces, there's a huge interest around management agreements. And I know that in the UK, it's something that's pretty well developed and everything, but in other regions of Europe, people are still trying to understand how that works, what are the terms and everything. And I remember at Coworking Europe, there was a panel where they were talking about those business models, and there were operators on stage from the UK, and all the questions they were receiving was from people who are in Europe trying to understand how to make management agreements, what's in it for them, how can they structure it with landlords. So I think it's also something that people really want to learn from, because it helps. I mean, in terms for co-working operators, it's much less risky. It's in terms of like investments and everything, so it allows for more as well. So I think that's also something that we might see going a little bit broader in other regions in Europe, compared to what's currently being done right now.
Okay, great. Thank you. Thank you for sharing those insights. Now on to the next one. Um, as we said, 2025 was a challenging year. I would say the period between 2020 in general and after that has been a challenging period for the whole industry. So, what do you think is going to separate thriving operators from the ones that struggle next year? And if you had to give an advice to operators that are running their space, like try to give one sign that, hey, if this is happening, it's a yellow to a red flag. Pay attention to it because you might be in trouble early on. So that's kind of what I want to figure out with you guys here.
One thing I would mention about what separates a thriving operator from one who struggle is, I guess if you just get down to the basics of it, it's, the financial model is really key. And sometimes you'll run into operators that will have thriving memberships, and you'll go in there one day, like, wow, this place is so busy. And you see the owner and they're a little stressed out, and you talk to them more, and you realize that all the activity doesn't mean that they're doing well financially. And so I think that this is one of the real keys as we're looking at being an operator that provides this immense work value and lifestyle value, is that it's got to be grounded in a really strong business model. And if that means having a lot of private offices so that you can focus on doing a lot of community partnerships and give back, then great. But at the end of the day, like, you've got to make sure that your financial plan is going to match. Like, if you have a lot of people in the space, you want to make sure that your numbers are doing good. And so you got to have to figure it out from the beginning.
And if we connect the dots to everything we've been discussing since the beginning of this conversation, I also think that if we see the industries like professionalizing, we are, leaning more and more toward hospitality. I think something very important is to invest in your team, helping your team grow in their role, helping your team, find networks where they can professionalize themselves as well, because there's so much pressure on community and experienced teams, to constantly be the face of the space, be there for the clients. But sometimes we shouldn't forget that they also need a space where they can professionalize themselves and learn and find, a network of peers that they can tap into to know that they're not alone and that what they're doing matters. Because sometimes I think maybe you also face it with Officer R&D when you do customer support and everything you receive is like, not angry, but complaints. You also want to see sometimes the positivity of things, and I think sometimes for community managers there's a fine line. So I want to say also that I think teams are a huge differentiator in the experience that's being offered to members. So for me, that's also something very important, to be able to invest in your teams, to keep them, to make sure that they feel like they are being heard, that they are growing. That's also something I believe would be very important moving forward.
I also think community needs to be, again, to agree with Pauline, to be a sort of key model in most co-working spaces to whatever level you decide between your brand and how much of touch points you need to have. Um, Touching on a previous point we made, you have to move with purpose, and you can't be everything to everyone. If you've got a building full of marketeers, why are we trying to force marketing? How to use Instagram, how to use Facebook ads onto your community, and also being able to step back and realize you don't own your community. Your community are their own thing, and you just help facilitate that. I think the guys that really try and force those communities, do those tick boxing community events, push people in a room and give them Peroni and pizza and go, oh, this is a community then, isn't this lovely? That just doesn't work anymore. To really being able to create something that can grow with you not there necessarily pushing people into places they don't want to go.
Yeah, I really agree with everything that's been said. And I think once you're building upon like a strong business model, which doesn't mean to mean selling out, it doesn't need to mean deprioritizing the mission or the vision that you have for the community. It's just smart about the ways that you're doing it in a sustainable way. But building upon that, I think if you're always able to remain flexible and to be able to pivot, as long as you're prioritizing the needs of your members. And that's why co-working was created. We didn't decide to build spaces and then hope people would come and sit next to us and work. We built spaces because a lot of our peers and other entrepreneurs and small businesses didn't have a suitable environment to work, didn't have access to some of those shared resources, didn't have access to larger networks or people to introduce them to others in the community. And so if we're prioritizing the needs of the members as they change over time, those are the spaces that are still around 20 years later. There are a lot of spaces thriving today that existed in the beginning. And It's because they've adapted over time. My first space is 21 years old. It's changed like maybe 7 times their entire branding, initiative, market, everything. And they're still here because they keep prioritizing what those members need. And I think it's also about being strategic in their programming. And James touched on this. It doesn't make sense just to have programming for the sake of programming. A lot of folks, though, will actually decide to run a separate events business or other kind of complementary programming very intentionally. And that can be used to fill gaps in the membership. I find that if it tends to be leaning towards like more males in the space, then maybe I bring in some events that really cater towards female entrepreneurs or folks who are starting new businesses. And it really fills the gaps in the membership. Or be strategic in the programming to bring in new kinds of members that you may be interested in introducing to the space without having to ask them to come in for a tour or reach them in another way. And partnerships as well that really help the spaces to thrive. If you're thinking about running a multi-use space, that may actually be 5 different full-time jobs: childcare, a co-working space, an events business, education or supportive resources or community service. Those are all different providers. And so rather than having to be an expert in all of those things, which myself have tried, uh, many, including myself, have tried and sometimes failed, bring in the partners that really do that work best and work with them to make sure that you're serving the members from all those angles, but from an expert position.
And if we have to give one advice, I guess, on the early warning signs, what each of you were kind of, some of you were operating a space as well. What is kind of early warning sign that you were looking for and you're like, oh man, I might be in trouble?
For me, it's the exit survey. So anytime a member leaves, there would be a conversation, ideally in person, but sometimes just a small survey to ask folks why it is they're moving on. And you start to notice a difference in that trend, and that's a bit of a flag. So it may be a shift from people, oh, I've gotten a better job and now I'm working from an office somewhere or I'm moving somewhere. Those are fine reasons to leave. But when people start leaving because of maybe a lack of culture fit or you don't have the amenities that they're looking for, there are definitely some signs there.
And just briefly, I'll add in not only a lack of cultural fit with the members, but also a lack of cultural fit with the staff. If you
Mhm.
start to see a lot of staff turnover early on, maybe that means you didn't set the expectation as the owner correct when you posted that community manager job description. And now all of a sudden they realize they're responsible for a lot more than they expected, or they're really overwhelmed because you're expecting them to manage 20,000 square feet of space because you're trying to save money on your bottom line. And so, like, it is, I think that would be an early warning sign to his staff that's either overwhelmed or doesn't stay for very long.
What
I
and
also
just to sorry, James, just to push on that one, just to give something specific. What is considered high turnover for community managers? Like, again, in your spaces, what would you say is high turnover in a year? Just to give an idea to the guys, to people.
I'll let someone else answer that one.
James, maybe you?
um yeah, so it's subjective, I'd say. I mean, how long's a piece of string? I mean, it's yeah, a community manager can make or break the space, and it's they're almost an anchor point, or the community's team is an anchor point. So if you do see that very quick turnover to a degree where whomever it is not staying long enough to embed themselves within the community, not knowing the members, not knowing habits, names, who they are, what they like, so on and so forth, that's when it starts to lose its pull. Um, I'd like to think I know most of my numbers, at least by first name. I know something about them, where they've been on holiday, so on and so forth. If I went and my replacement didn't have that same relationship and didn't stick around long enough to build that up again, it's not relevant.
Yeah, sorry, I interrupted you. Probably wanted to give us another.
No, yeah, I was just going to go back to see what David and Ashley say. It's your turnover of members, tenants, or residents, or however you want to coin it. It's those quiet exits. It's those who just give them the notice and go off into the world, and you don't know why. There's no reasoning. There's no standout issue where, hey, they've left because we don't have that. We don't have a gym on site, or they are wanting to be more closer to financial district, or it's those who just leave without giving any feedback or out, the surprise. And I think when that happens, there's a long list of things that must have happened in order to get to that point. And I almost feel that's the beginning of the end.
Julian, you want to add anything or?
I mean, the what I hear because is this notion of like caring, you know, how much everybody cares for the space. So on the member side, how much do they care for, you know, it's not just taking, but there's also this notion of giving back. And then for the team, how much do they care about delivering a good service, making, you know, having a good dynamic between themselves, taking care of like tickets and stuff. I think this notion of caring is very important. And if you can ensure that everybody cares for where they are, then things should function. But then if care start to slip a little bit through the cracks, then that's I think when you know you can see that there might be some struggles and like simple examples. But for instance, you know, some co-working spaces, the first thing that the team that opens the space in the morning does is a walkthrough to make sure that if you turn on the lights, everything functions, light bulbs are not broken, the coffee machine works, everything is on and whatnot. So like those are like small details because we host a summit for community managers. And last year, this was, we did it in Brighton in September. And that's something that was talked about a lot, you know, like that at some point, because you're in the space every day, you stop seeing things that don't work. And I think that's also where struggle comes in. So having moments in the day that grounds you back to checking the physical space to make sure that the level of care is always high would prevent you from starting to struggle or see signs of struggles. Because the moment, you know, I don't know, I give other examples. If the space start to smell or if there's something that's broken and never fixed, then people will see it, you know. So I think ensuring that level of care is always consistent is very important to prevent struggles.
Okay, so I guess I can summarize that one of the big early warning signs uh, are hidden in your own team. Like if you start seeing them to struggle to leave too much or stop caring about the space, then probably you should take notice, more or less. Okay, we're on top of the hour, and I just wanted to remind our audience that we're going to have a Q&A over here. So we have two submitted questions up until now. If you want to prepare some questions, we're going to move now to the last discussion point that we have over here. We're going to do kind of a quick bet slash prediction for what's going to happen in 2026. And after that, we're going to try to answer of your questions. So guys, 2026, you have to make one prediction. I'm not sure if you're a gambler or not, or you like betting, but if you had to do it, what would it be?
Anyone else?
Apparently you're the one.
I'll start off. I guess thinking in terms of a bridge. You know, as you think about the mainstream workforce, and you think about which has the mainstream office building, the office asset, and then you've got the co-working operator, which has kind of become this community development work experience provider, and then you've got all this, you know, vacancy in the offices. What my prediction is, and I spoke about this in the trend report that you're going to send out, so I'll just be quick and people can read through my thoughts on it. But I believe that co-working will become the operating ecosystem of the flexible office asset. And so essentially what that means in just kind of in a specific is that building owners will see that they have these office assets that need to be operated in a way that matches the future. And the co-working operator is that group, but they're not just managing members, they're managing the ecosystem of the entire building. So that's what I predict. And that might take some years. And the early innovative building owners are going to be the first ones that start doing that. You are starting to see that around the States. There was a really interesting one in Auckland, New Zealand. There's brand new build, fully integrated, full ecosystem. These things are happening. And so I think the operator will be running the ecosystem of the whole asset.
I would love to echo all of that, but I'll keep it simpler as well. I agree with everything David said. And I think that in more and more cities, we're going to see co-working treated as essential community infrastructure. And that could be as part of these multi-use centers, residential towers, or other kind of community hubs that include co-working as a major piece of that ecosystem, but really seeing co-working itself as the essential infrastructure.
Again, I think we're just going to copy what everyone says and then just pretend like we've come up with our own thing. But yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, it's the operators that really treat Flex as a portfolio strategy, not just a singular product. Really growing with thought and process and procedures and build before you move on to the next one, not just, hey, let's roll out 100 units over the next 18 months and see what happens. We can backfill and we can promise people that we're going to fill. And really sort of layering in again that community product into the mix and looking at every touch point almost like a hospitality product. You go into a restaurant and every single step of your service is mapped out. I think really Flex and co-working really needs to take that model and let's look at every single touch point of our member and customer journey and how we can give not only the best experience but maximize that revenue coming back into the part almost.
For me, I mean, I don't have a crystal ball. I wish I did, but I think being able to, educate ourselves to technology and what technology can do, because I think, as we touched on earlier, we are seeing the surface of AI and all the tools that can help us, empower the spaces, but also empowers the team. So I think we'll see much more interesting technology rising that will propel co-working to new heights. Will it be in 2026? I don't know. Maybe we will start seeing. Ivan, you should tell us. But yeah, I think for me, technology is not to be disregarded. So a piece of advice also to operators would be to try to educate yourself in the matter, see currently how is your technology being connected, how can that be improved so that everything we've been talking about here, the experience for the teams, but also for your members, can kind of like exponentially grow and be better.
Yeah, and if I may add to this one specifically, I do believe that due to all the hype with AI, inevitably operators are going to be forced to figure out how to implement AI in their daily workflows. I do believe, guys, that you are actually right. My prediction on the AI front, because I didn't have the time to respond there, is AI. So first of all, software, even our software helped a lot, especially if you're scaling. It puts guardrails around people so you can replicate the same process and you have some level of efficiency, but it also created work. And I can see community managers spending time with Office R&D, and it's for some of them it's extra work. And the management loves it. They get the reporting, they get the data, they get the processes kind of being very solid, but it actually takes from the time of the people that are working with the actual members to fill out those systems. I truly believe that we're going to get to a point where the systems will fill themselves with information and they're going to do the pretty tedious work that is required on a daily basis. And I'm very supportive of the fact that, from my standpoint, a co-working and flexible operator is just about hospitality. It's just about having the right community manager, being taken care of all the things that are in the office and all of that. And I think that's where co-working teams should actually spend their time. I truly hope that next year AI, including Office R&D to a large point, is going to help everyone in freeing up some of their day, several hours per day, to spend more time with the members, talking with people, something that AI is still not too good in doing, like in a physical environment, and spending less time filling Office R&D kind of fields and Excel sheets and all that. That's my hope for next year. I'm not sure if we're going to get there. And the second part is I feel hopeful that this is going to be the year where landlords, based on the pressure from the market and still some vacancies in some spaces, are truly going to start embracing partnerships with co-working operators, because yes, some of them are willing to do it on their own. That is right, and some of them are doing a pretty good job, but most of them are probably going to want to partner with experienced operators that can actually help them activate buildings. And I very much like this analogy that we did about the heart of the building. You actually need it, and I have actually seen it. We are actually thinking about our office space in the same way. We want to have access to flexible workspaces and wherever we want to go. And I do believe that once you get exposed to a truly like flex office co-working space, it's extremely hard to go back to a traditional lease and start taking care of the whole office. And it's like, what do you mean? So I think also the fact that we're changing generations a little bit, you're starting to see more Gen Z kind of working in co-working spaces, and they're kind of setting the trend for employers as well. They're like, what is this boring office space? Like, why are we here? And there's going to be more and more pressure to try to replicate this experience across the whole office space, which is then going to put pressure on landlords. And as a result of that, we're slowly starting to get to a point where co-working is going to be the de facto standard. I mean, it's going to take more than 1 year, but that's my prediction. Um, okay, yeah. So enough with us talking. Let's see what the audience has prepared for us. Just give me a second so I can go through the questions. We have 4 of them, and I'm gonna start with the first one. So interesting thoughts, James. This was back like 20 minutes ago. Have you checked out Eagle Eye Networks and Brivo in terms of security automation?
I was sorry, have I checked out Eagle Labs?
Eagle Eye Networks and Brivo in terms of security and automation.
No, I haven't. But if anyone wants to send me some information, by all means. No, 100%. Yeah, if anyone can recommend anything, I'd love to be able to see what we can map out and see potentially where we can move forwards on.
Okay, the next one. Can you share ROI typically operators and landlords try to target? And the second one is, how are immigration policies in the US having an impact?
For ROI that landlords are trying to target, one thing that's always important when you model a pro forma for a new co-working business, like if you're a building owner, for example, is that you always want to assume that you're paying yourself rent, paying yourself market rent. So whatever your rent rate would be, if you're trying to lease out the whole space, you always want, maybe you create a new operating company for yourself. And so you compare everything, all your OpEx and all your, risk comparative to what rent rate you'd be able to get. So if maybe your rent rate normally would be $30 per foot US, but maybe you figure out that your rent rate could become $100 a foot if you operated a co-working space. Well, then you're comparing, those two together, but at the same time, there's risk associated as well. So you have to weigh that all together. But I would definitely say you're always comparing traditional rent rate with revenue per square foot that you could get otherwise.
Okay, and this is a very US centric one, but are immigration policies in the US having any impact on the industry?
I haven't really noticed them, but there probably is a nuanced, discussion beneath the scenes on it, but I'm not aware of it.
Okay. And anyone else want to share a different perspective on the ROI, or you're more or less aligned with what David said?
Well, I spoke from the landlord perspective, but maybe it would be helpful for someone to say the ROI from the operator perspective. I'm not sure.
I think, well, maybe I shouldn't say. I think my ROI is a bit different. I'm thinking about impact for the community on the investments that we're making into talent retention, for example, or increasing productivity of the members, more resilient workforce, and also thinking about like generational impact in the communities that we're serving. So that's a bit different.
I actually thank you so much for saying that. So ROI is such an interesting word, and of course I took the very static, old school perspective, but it was scientists that said years ago, if you can't measure it, it's not real. Well, I disagree with that. And so does quantum mechanics, and so does spirituality, and so do so many other things. And so, like, just because you can't measure a return on a co working space, does that mean it's not real? Of course not. And so, these things like return on community, return on experience, return on how you feel when you go home to your family, these things are real. And I don't know how to measure it, but I would say that that's probably a more important ROI than just the financial metrics.
Okay, moving on to the next one. It's from a fellow co-working operator that is really curious about dynamic pricing. For those of you seeing it in action, what actually makes it work and what should operators watch out for so it doesn't confuse members or backfire on revenue?
That might be for you, Yvonne.
Our Office R&D do a
Yeah,
great dynamic pricing product.
I if you don't have an opinion, I can jump on this one, but I'm gonna
Oh,
wait for
you.
you if you. Yeah.
please do.
Okay. From my perspective, it's overhyped. Although we are kind of also working on it, and I know that there's vendors out there that are very heavily promoting it. Why is it overhyped? The piece around AI and making it super dynamic, flexible, and all of that. I don't think the industry is at the point where, I mean, we're just getting to a point where AI is entering the industry. We're trying to talk how e-commerce is super important, and we still have operators that have websites that look like they're from 1995 and all that, and trying to push dynamic pricing and basically saying, oh, it's going to take care of your all of your pricing automatically and make price adjustments. I think it's a little bit scary for most operators. So my personal advice is, yes, it can make a difference if you have a high transaction kind of a co-working space where you have a pretty good e-commerce website. You have a lot of traffic coming to it, and as a result of that, small adjustments to the pricing on a like for each transaction that is happening are going to ultimately have a great benefit for you on the P&L side of things. If you're seeing, first of all, if you don't have a good website, if you don't see any meaningful transactions happening or not enough like existing meeting rooms that you're charging for, this is going to have limited impact. So once you have the prerequisite of the website of the transactions, I think you should start with just the basics. I think someone mentioned like probably there's a Friday or a Monday or a specific time of the day where nobody's using several rooms. Just try it out. Like try it because it's not one size fits all. As all of you said, you cannot just replicate the same template across all of your locations, all of your resources. So it's hard to say what the best practice is there. So try it with few of your rooms. If you see kind of a good uh, kind of increase in occupancy, that's great. Also, don't make it super automated because then it can actually backfire on revenue. By the time you understand that it messed up, you're probably going to have a very bad month. And if you're not looking at your data in depth, you might not even notice it for several months, and then it's becoming problematic. So dynamic pricing is not going to save your space if you're struggling. It can help you optimize some of the revenue that you're making. Make sure you have a good website, make sure you have enough transactions on a monthly basis, and also make sure you start slow, you experiment, you see what works, and then and only then kind of replicate and start complicating it with additional rules. So that's my honest reaction to dynamic pricing. If somebody disagrees with me, now is a good time to kind of have a argument on that one.
I agree with everything you say, Yvonne.
Okay. Cool. Last one. Talking about trends and next year and technology. The last one is from Thomas, who apparently has a startup that does co-working automations and smart devices, saving energy, avoiding damage with preventive alerts, real-time data. Do you see this trend growing in co-working? Do you have them installed in your space, and what has the experience been like? I feel like part of the data will help AI will with these physical space information, occupancy, usage, temperature, CO2, humidity. So, any experience with that?
So essentially, he's asking about the the
Smart
mechanic
devices.
Like
mechanics.
IoT or
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm going to reiterate. He's basically asking if you guys are using or seeing the use of smart devices that help with saving energy and avoiding damage. IoT devices, are they getting growing in terms of co-working spaces? Do you have them installed? And what has your experience been like?
So I've seen a lot around sort of heat mapping and utilization based off smart devices. I.e., you've got your member app on your phone, and I utilize with a very specific area, and it's mapped with CCTV. And hey, desk 17 co-working spaces got a utilization of 70%. I also feel the way the tech is working down the hospitality route of hyper personalization, that I've got my member app on my phone or I've got a key card and I tap into a meeting space. Why can't the room remember that the last time I was here, I got the light set at 70%, I like my humidity at 65, and so on and so forth. So I feel a way this is another great way we can look at utilizing or leveraging premium hospitality sort of outlook within co-working and flex spaces. And I also feel in terms from a reporting perspective, everyone is very read up in data now. Everyone wants as much data as we can give them. People want utilization. People want ESG information. People want, hey, on a Tuesday afternoon 6 months ago, did you have this light on and why and what was the watches and so on and so forth. So I think there's a lot of exciting things within the space, and I think there's a lot of space for businesses like this to sort of jump on and grow within their specific niche.
Yeah, I agree with James. When we travel with Dimitar to visit co-working spaces, I see it more and more, like IoT devices being used for different purposes that serves the experience, whether it is to make the building smarter, but also to help with the overall experience offered to members. So yeah, I definitely see that something that helps operators also understand how they perform on different layers that are not just what occupancy and like data from the co-working software. They also see through other tools and IoT devices that they're using, how members consume the space in different ways, but also how the space is performing on different things, like energy, CO2 consumption. I've seen a really interesting co-working space that does that in Spain. I'm trying to remember the name, but if someone wants to talk and if I find the name in a second, Triple, it's called TRIPLE, for Thomas if he wants to know. They do very cool stuff around that.
One thing I'll add to Thomas's question that I'm really glad he brought up is that we are evolving to the intelligent building. It's like what is intelligence as it is? And that's why I used the word ecosystem, the operating ecosystem, when I was talking about co-working in the future. The whole building is becoming intelligent. And a lot of it, that's not even in our industry. It's in these IoT, type sectors, et cetera. But I think that we have to reimagine how the building learns and how the building integrates all the things, the people, the facility technology, the business models, the monetization strategy. And so it's like if the whole building is intelligent and is always learning, it's always evolving. But in order to be intelligent, you have to be flexible. And so I think if anything, that's the real trend for our future society is just flexibility. We've got to bring flexibility and connectivity everywhere. And, it's like, how do you integrate it all together? And we're all kind of in it together. And it's an exciting time. It's overwhelming, but also opportunistic.
Okay. Pull in one last ask. Can you spell the name of the space again? Thomas is just asking. We can close it after that.
TRIPLE, like triple, but
Yeah.
the Spanish way. Yeah.
Okay. Well, Thomas, good luck. You have a new lead there. Okay. Well, everyone, I really appreciated the time together. Unfortunately, we have to go, although I'm sure we can learn a lot more about next year. I want to really thank all of our participants for joining, for taking the time to prepare and for sharing additional information. You're all going to see them on our webinar page. Please follow them in LinkedIn if you want to learn the latest from them. There's plenty you can learn there. And again, thank you everyone for joining, and have a great rest of the week. It was a pleasure having you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye, guys.